and welcome to this version of Admin Chat. I'm Heather Wright and I'm going to be talking today about how to embed more successful habits, or we could have put it another way, which is how to embed habits that will help you to become more successful. But I guess that just seemed like a mouthful when I was putting it out there. But it is really nice to see you and welcome. Yes, indeed, it is canned applause, just so that I feel a little bit more like we're in touch, like we're all actually in a room together. Remember those days? That was nice. So just a little bit about me before I go on, because many of you may not have come across me. I like to do lots of fitness. I've got 4 black belts in different martial arts. Now that scares people when we're in the room together, but when we're online, people go, yeah, right, okay, who cares? For those of you who are listening in or watching from New Zealand, yes, that bungee jump was taken in New Zealand. I'd love to say I do lots of those, but I've done it once. But anyway, that's the kind of person I am. I keep bees, which is I really enjoy. I find it really calming, which is odd, isn't it? Really odd. And of course, those of you who are dog lovers will have honed in on my little girl Lily there, Lily the Vizsla puppy, although she's already bigger than that. When I'm not doing all of those kind of things, I run training courses, workshops, and speak at conferences when they're around. So that's fantastic, and I really enjoy that. So maybe some point we'll get to meet in person. So what's today going to be about? Well, for over 20 years, I've been running programs on how to get the best out of people, whether it's high performing teams or leadership or personal impact or influencing skills. It's all about that people element. How can we become the best version of ourselves? And I discovered quite early on that in this world of performance psychology, we seem to be missing a key point. We were talking about what we wanted from people, and you'll know this in your organizations. You'll spend ages in workshops defining the behaviors you want from people. Then you'll spend time communicating those behaviors to people, sending out memos, or again doing workshops, conferences. Maybe you have a big launch with posters on the wall and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the things we often miss is the how. How do you change behavior? If you've been doing something a particular way for a long period of time, how do you change that to doing it another way? Now, I'm often called in as a motivational speaker because I guess I'm quite lively and quite entertaining. And they say, these people need more motivating. Well, there are times when I wonder if that's a bit of an insult. I meet some incredibly intelligent people who love their jobs, who really want to change, but find it difficult. I mean, think about it for a moment. Have you ever had a habit that you'd really like to either adopt or change because you want it to do you some good, or it's been doing you some bad? And you've struggled with it. It's often not the motivation. In fact, research tells us that when doctors tell people if you don't change a particular habit, it's going to have a massive detrimental effect on your life, only 7% actually change. So it's not necessarily motivation we need. It's the ability to understand how to change behaviors, and that's what I'm going to cover in our session today. So I'm going to cover the 3 things that you can see on the screen here. I'm going to cover beliefs and habits, because we can't get away from that psychological aspects. But then we're going to get into the science of it, the brain and habit, and habit loops. Okay, so let's start a little bit with beliefs and habits. So, what is it you believe about your habits? I know that sounds a bit weird. What is it you believe about your habits? Well, the thing about excellence is it's really a habit. It's about consistency. So we have to develop certain behaviors as habits. If you sat down now, in fact, I recommend pause the video, grab a pen and write down the habits that you think are blocking your ability to be the best version of you. And maybe on the other side of the page, the habits that you've developed that are helping you to be the good you, the great you that you are today. I can guarantee that the one on the side, the list that have guaranteed you to be good, you've developed over time. You didn't get good at it overnight. You may have had an innate skill at it, but certain things you've gone over and over until they were consistent. Now, unfortunately, on the other side of that list of the habits you'd like to get rid of, unfortunately, also we've drilled that into ourselves. Maybe out of self-protection. Maybe you came from a big family and, you're always wrangling with brothers and sisters over the dinner table about stuff and you became defensive. Maybe at school, you felt like people were getting at you. Maybe there's a particular teacher. I don't want to bring up painful memories here, but these are the things that can develop habits that aren't necessarily good for us. Now, there are 3 types of habits. Whenever I'm talking to people about habits, they mostly think about the one that's top on that list, physical habits. But what we forget is that we also have thought processing habits and emotional habits. I'm sure you've met people who constantly think of themselves as a victim. They constantly think of everything that's going on around them as, what's the impact on me? Now that's a habit, okay? They weren't born doing that. That's a habit that they've developed over time, so much so they probably don't even notice they're doing it. And it's the same thing with triggers to our emotions. So again, stop and think for a moment. What emotional habits have you got? Some of them will be great. Some of them will be emotionally, I feel amazing when this happens. I laugh, I can't help but laugh when this happens. When I'm with this person, I always feel good. And yes, it might be that that person makes you feel good, but now you've known them for so long, just that phone call from them or that their face on the call, the online call, or when you go to meet them, you start to feel better already because it's become an emotional habit, which is great. Unfortunately, we also have the detrimental ones, which are the habits that make us feel sad or got at or angry about things. Okay, and those are habits. So one of the first things I want to talk about with regard to beliefs and habits, and I'm not going to spend a long time on beliefs and habits, and the reason I'm not going to spend a long time on that is because I know that there are quite a few admin chats about that, and so I know that you've seen that material lots of times. Well, what I want to talk about is the science. I want to get onto that because that's more likely to be something you've not seen before. But I can't ignore the belief side. As soon as you start to say, I am a worrier, I always feel anxious, I'm an anxious person, that belief says it's part of my character. Okay, it's part of my character, which implies I can't do anything about it. And subconsciously, that's what we're telling ourselves, and therefore that's what we believe. So I'd like to suggest that we change our wording. I have a habit of blah, 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 whatever it might be. I have a habit of worrying. I'm not taking away from the fact that you have a habit of worrying if you are a worrier, or you have a habit of being anxious in particular situations, which might be quite sensible. But as soon as you start saying, I have a habit of, the implication is different. The implication now is that it's something that you could potentially change. You could develop a new habit, and therefore it gives you back control over that emotion or that thought process. So even by just changing our wording, we start to change our beliefs. And it is important, before we even get into the science of it, that we start to understand that our beliefs about our habits are important. And if you believe you can't change it, oh, well, my parents were like that, my mother was always like that, my father was like that, then you're already starting to believe that it can't be changed. Now, I love this quote by Marcus Aurelius. He said to me the other day, 2nd century AD, if something ails or bothers you, it's not the thing itself, but the importance you attach to it. And that you have the power to change at any time. Wow. Modern quotes. So think about your beliefs as we go in there. And of course, our motivation is important. Do we want to change? But I'm pretty certain that the reason you're watching this is because you've got some stuff you'd like to change so that you can become the best you more often, consistently. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about the brain and habits and go into some science, which I know you'll enjoy. The brain and habits. What is it you know about the brain? What is it you know about the body and calories? Let's start off with the way the brain works, but really, really simply, because let's face it, I am no neuroscientist. I'm certainly not a surgeon. But I have a question for you. I wonder if you know how many calories the body uses if you did an hour's exercise on an exercise bike. Are you thinking about under 100? between 100 and 200? Are you thinking about between 200 and 300 or more? And of course, it depends on how fast you pedal, how much energy you put into it. But I believe that the average is between 200 and 300. Okay, that's fair enough. What about if you were to run a marathon? Under 1,000 calories? Between 1 and 2? Between 2 and 3 maybe? Maybe more? I often wonder if my running a marathon slowly uses more calories than some of these people who run them really fast. I have no idea, but I do know that the average amount of calories it costs someone of about 15 stone to run a marathon is about 3,500. Okay, but here's the most important question. I wonder if you know how many calories a chess grandmaster uses on the day of a major tournament. I don't know if any of you have watched Queen's Gambit. What a fantastic series. It was. I was riveted, and a lot of people have said to me, it made chess exciting. Can't believe it. Certainly got me playing again. But if you ask yourself, how many calories does a chess grandmaster use on the day of a tournament? Are you thinking under 1,000? Well, because they're not running a marathon, right? Or on an exercise bike. Are you thinking between 1,000 and 2,000? Between 2 and 3? 3 and 4? Over 4? Over 5? Research tells us that chess grandmasters use over 5,000, some over 6,000 calories on the day of a major tournament. Now, I know, now you're thinking, well, why is that? Why is that? And of course, the answer comes to you. Well, it's the stress they're under, it's the pressure. But I just want you to put that together with the information we know about the body. The body uses a lot of calories when it's doing exercise. But what we're saying here is the brain uses more calories than any other organ in the body. Now, in order for you not to get into calorie deficit, if you think about our primeval times, before we had so much sugar in our diets and so much chocolate and stuff like that, in order for us not to get into calorie deficit, because imagine how many woolly mammoths you'd have to kill to make up that many calories, the brain lays down habits. And when you have a habit, it uses less calories. Whereas a chess grandmaster is constantly thinking of new ways. It's constantly, I was told once that a chess grandmaster thinks something like 40 moves ahead. Now, 40 moves isn't just 40 moves. It's all the different options and changes and the different ways things could go. They're constantly thinking of new ways to do things. But habits use less calories. So the brain is constantly looking at a way to lay down habits for us. So let's have a talk about this for a moment. So we have a million neurons. We all have a million neurons. Each neuron talks to the other neurons. It sends electrical signals to the other neurons, and it sends those little lines, well, little connections, and it lays down stuff in between the neurons. Lays down stuff, neuropeptides, neurotransmitters, proteins, minerals, etc., etc. We'll call it stuff, okay? What it's doing is it's creating a connection. Of course, the first time it creates that connection, it's a lot harder than after it's created it the first time. And it's a lot easier the second or third time, because what happens is every time that electricity moves from one neuron to another, it lays down more stuff, even more stuff. And you can see in this primitive, if you like, illustration that connection's getting wider, smoother. It's also getting faster. And of course, it's using less calories. It's saving the body energy, which is really good for your body or for your brain, if you think about it. We call these things dendrites, the connections in the brain. We're going to call them dendrites because we're not going to do any brain surgery and we don't have to overcomplicate things, okay? Now, I want us to have a look at this, because when we have these connections going from one neuron to another, creating those dendrites, you'll see that some of the connections are wider than the other connections. Now, the ones that are wider, okay, encourage further traffic. The ones that are wider and smoother are faster. Okay, those things we can call habits. Those are the ones that we're going to do more and more often. And the reason for that is because we're talking about electricity. And the law of physics says that electricity must travel down the path of least resistance. So it's gonna, when it gets to the junction, and it could go either way, it'll travel down the path of least resistance. So the wider, smoother connection, dendrite. Okay. So repetition increases the likelihood of further repetition. Okay, so that's great, that's brilliant. So these are laying down habits. So let's think about our physical reactions, our physical habits. What do all physical reactions start with? The first time you did it, even the second time you did that physical reaction, you reached for a drink to have a drink, or if you're a baby, you reach for your rattle or your toy. Okay, everything we do starts with a thought. Okay, we have that thought. If you've ever watched a baby really focusing on trying to get its thumb in its mouth or reaching for something, watch it's trying to build that connection and it's also trying to get the muscles to do what it wants it to do. And of course now we're a little bit older, all right, some of us considerably older, it happens really quickly. In fact, I don't know about you, I can reach for that glass of wine supposedly without really thinking about it. It's almost become subconscious because that dendrite is well created. Oh, I'm not sure about the grammar on that one. So those are our physical reactions. What about our emotional reactions? What do all of our emotional reactions start with? What do they start with? If you're going to feel happy or sad or scared or worried or defensive, what do they start with? Well, of course, they start with the same thing. The only reason you're feeling a particular way is because of the way you're thinking. Because every emotion and every physical reaction is about the chemicals in the body, the chemicals that are released. And we have over 300 different chemicals that are released into our system from various parts of our body when they are required for whatever reason, whether it's our fight or flight mechanism, whether it's to make us sad, happy, whatever it might be. Here's a couple of them. I thought you might be sick of the pictures of COVID. So here's adrenaline and serotonin and cortisol. And those are the things I look at. And they are released into our body because we're thinking a particular thing. If we're feeling angry, it's because we're thinking angry. Now, of course, we're going to feel angry more often if we've created a connection that says, when this thing happens, God, it makes me so mad. Have you ever, here's a question, have you ever, when you were leaving a meeting or driving or whatever, replayed a conversation and started to try and work out what that person meant? And while you were doing that, you decided that they were just having a go at you. Have you ever imagined what you ought to have said and then what you thought they might have said back? How often have you got angry at an imagined conversation? Well, if I did that, they'd only say this, and that just wouldn't be right. I've watched people getting angry about imagined conversations so often. It's kind of crazy. It's not really happening. We can get angry about those things. It's just like getting sad at a film. I can cry with the best of them at a sad film, knowing that those actors haven't actually died. They've got up and gone off to the coffee tent or whatever, to eat their breakfast a little bit later on. So if we want to feel happier more often, we have to start building the connections. We have to start building habits if we want to feel more confident. So again, going back to this, in order for you to be more successful, to be the best version of you more often, we have to build the connections. We have to build the habits. Any habit you learn to do, you probably started off consciously doing it. I suppose like a tennis player going to train and hitting balls back over the net again and again and again, developing muscle memory, developing habits, so that when they're actually in a tournament, when that shot comes at them as a surprise, to their body, it's not a surprise. Well, it's the same thing. If you want to feel more confident, we have to start building those connections. Making sense so far? Okay. So now I'd like to go into habit loops, if that's okay. So habit loops is about how do we change this thing? So here's the how we do it. Now we've laid down the stuff about beliefs. We've laid down the stuff about how the brain creates habits. Let's start making use of this and let's start talking about some habit loops. This is what we call a habit loop. There's a cue, a habit, and then a reward. Okay, a cue, a habit, and then a reward. So at some point in our lives, something has triggered or cued a particular behavior, thought process, or emotion, and that's now become a habit. So when that cue happens again, We get that habit. But because of that habit, we get a reward. Now, at the moment, I'm busy training a puppy. And it is really interesting, after the years and years of psychology I've studied about conditioning and classical conditioning and Pavlov's dogs, I've now got a dog that I absolutely know I've got to make sure my dog associates a reward with the habit that I want them to do. Now, a reward can be something positive that we give them, but it might be avoidance of a negative. So lying to our parents about something that we're claiming we didn't do, the reward is to avoid punishment. Although, of course, they often found out later on, I like to think, or maybe you were a better liar than me, I don't know. I always got caught in the end and therefore learned not to do it so much. So cue, habit, reward. So step one of changing this is to spend time, first of all, identifying the habit that we want to change or develop or block or whatever it might be. So step one, what's the hindering habit that we've got? Something that's preventing us from being at our best. Is it a thought processing habit? Is it an emotion habit? And then we think about, well, what would I prefer to do in that situation? What's my preferred habit? When this happens, I want to do this instead. Yeah, that would be nice. I want to do this instead. So that's our step one. We look at the habit. Okay. Step two, we look at the reward. What is the reward my current habit is given me? Or if it's a new habit, what's the reward the new habit that I want from the new habit? Okay. Now, this is the bit that gets a little bit deeper psychologically, because a lot of the rewards aren't physical. So it's easy with a puppy. It's usually, a bit of sausage, a bit of cheese, something like that. All right. And that's nice and easy. And for us, obviously, if we're comfort eaters, then it's a very physical thing. But a lot of our rewards are more psychologically based. So to give you an example, I was called into an organization. They had a team of 70 people and they wanted them to collaborate more. Now, they'd spent ages defining what collaboration was. Now, these were engineers. They weren't stupid, okay? But they'd spent time defining what collaboration was, and they'd spent time doing the why we should collaborate, how important it was to the organization, how much more money they could make, how much more bonuses people could get, how much better they would be if they collaborated. They all understood that. They understood it. So actually what they did was they called me and said they need more motivating. And I said, let's not treat them like they're stupid. What they need to understand is how to change a habit. They want to. Now, when I said to them, what's the reward for not collaborating, because that was the current behavior, not collaborating. What's the reward for not collaborating? 70 intelligent people sat around scratching their chins. I don't know. There is no reward. Surely there's no reward. Of course there's a reward. There's avoidant rewards, like avoiding it taking too much time because they're currently rewarded on the speed with which they do things. Okay? Or what about, I don't have to speak to the person in the other department who's going to try and block my brilliant idea and make me feel stupid. Avoidance and feeling bad is a big deal for us psychologically. There were loads and loads of rewards for not collaborating and very few rewards for collaborating. So what we have to do is spend time thinking about that current habit we've got. What reward are we getting from it? Okay, what reward are we getting from it? Is it avoidance of a negative? Is it moving towards pleasure or away from pain? And then what we have to do is we have to play with those rewards, because to us psychologically, rewards are really important. So when I'm trying to develop a fitness habit, okay, instead of spending my whole time while I'm running or on the bike or whatever, go, oh, this is hard work. Oh, this is really, everything aches. I spend a lot of time feeding myself with real positives, like I had a coach yelling it at me. If you could hear me, I sound really, really silly. Come on, Heather, you're doing really well. Oh, you're so proud. I find smug self-righteousness works, but please don't tell anybody because it's a bit embarrassing. I'm doing really well today. Yeah. Okay. So what is that reward that we need? But it has to be strong enough to drive the behavior. Okay, so we want to spend time with it, an emotional reward. Then what we're going to do, step 3, is we're going to have a look at the cue. What's the trigger that triggers the current habit? Now, I tend to refer to this cue as the sliding doors moment. I don't know if any of you have seen the film Sliding Doors, but in the film Sliding Doors, I'm not going to spoil it for you, and by the way, it is on Netflix and it stands up quite well. Gwyneth Paltrow, who plays the main character, is having a really bad day. She's having a really bad day. This is really at the beginning of the film. And what happens is she gets sacked from her job and she lives in London and she's carrying a big box of stuff and she's going down the steps to the tube station and a child gets in her way. At that moment, the film splits into two timelines. One where the child prevents her getting through the sliding doors of the train, and one where she gets the train, she gets through the sliding doors. And the rest of the film is based on these two different timelines. One where she gets through the sliding doors and one where she doesn't. And the one where she doesn't, she arrives home that day 3 minutes or 4 minutes later than she would have done, and her life is completely different. So I'd like you to think about that cue as a sliding doors moment. What's the moment when you currently do the hindering habit, but you would now like to do the new habit? You have to identify the cue. You have to become aware of the cue, okay? So there are 5 types of cues for us as human beings. Location. There are things you do when you're in particular places, like when you get home of an evening and you sit down and you're watching the telly, when you get in the car to go somewhere, when you go for a walk. There are particular cues from particular locations. There's a time. I mean, how many of you go, oh, I'm useless until I've had my coffee in the morning? And if you haven't had it by 8:30 or 9 o'clock or what, maybe some of you are early at 8 in the morning, 5 in the morning, whatever, there's a time of day. And sometimes, I don't know about you, when I'm on holiday, it's almost like I can feel that time of day. Oh, it's 5 o'clock, I ought to be doing this, or it's 9 o'clock, I ought to be doing this. So we have types of cue that are time of day. Emotional states, other people, immediately preceding action. When you do one thing, you do another. How many of you have pressed send on an email or a text before you actually meant to? Because you nearly always go, yours sincerely, boom, oh no, I was going to go back and check it. Isolate that cue. Find out when it is. Okay, find out when it is. I tend to write these things down. What's the cue? What's the habit? What's the reward? If you're a writer, I find it clarifies it in my head. So see how that goes for you. And step 4, generate a plan. For the next week, when that happens, I'm going to do the new habit at that point. And then I'm going to give myself the reward. Remember the reward. For the next week, when that cue happens, I am going to bum. Okay, step 4. And step 5, you must drill the skill. There is absolutely no substitute for drilling the skill. You have to do it over and over. We've got to build the dendrite. The good news is it will become easier. As the dendrite gets wider and thicker and smoother, it will become easier. So drill that skill. Now, it actually takes longer than a week, as many of you will know, to actually generate a habit. Research tells us, and I don't know whether I should tell you this because the most recent research tells us it's about 61 days. I know that sounds forever, but we're talking about doing it permanently. You'll start to feel it ease after about 20 to 21. You probably find it starts to ease after about 7. I tend to, rather than think about 61 days or whatever it might be, I tend to think of it in smaller chunks. So a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Okay, so I tend to go in weeks because I can do nearly everything for about a week. And then at the end of that week, feeling a bit smug with myself, I'll add another week on until eventually I keep going. Okay, my brain knows what it's doing. Okay, it knows I'm kidding myself that it's only going to be a week, but I feel pretty good because I'm building those dendrites. Okay. There is absolutely no substitute for that. Now, think about it as a loop. However, I also think it can be quite useful to think of it pretty much in a straight line, becoming more and more aware of the cue, drilling the new habit, therefore repetition, and the reward will help to embed that new habit. Yeah? So I tend to think of it a bit in a straight line, although, of course, it is cyclical. All right. Remember, excellence is an act won by training and a habituation. If we want to be really good at stuff, we have to train it, okay? So these are my details. I'd like you to think about what I've said, okay? And feel free to get in touch with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn, that'd be great. I'm always posting little bits about habits or how words make a difference when we're influencing. It would be really nice to kind of see you on LinkedIn. It'd be nice if you posted a quote. But I'm also going to ask you a favor. I'm going to ask you to keep an eye out. If someone in your organization is talking about how they want their team to perform better, then I'd love to come and have a chat with them. And what's more, if you quote that you were on this workshop, I don't know what to call this video, then I offer to do a session for you online, free, if we can get enough people there, and and they'll enjoy that interaction. It would be really, really nice live session. So do get in touch. It'd be really nice to hear from you. And if you have any questions at all, it would be my pleasure to answer them. My email is there, heather.wright@advance-performance.co.uk. I hope that's made a lot of sense to you. Have a brilliant, brilliant rest of the day. I look forward to seeing you again.